Welcome to the Israel Now Forum webinar series. I'm Maura Schreier-Fleming, Chairman of the Israel Now Forum Speakers Committee. The in-person Israel Now Forum is scheduled for the evening of Wednesday, October 28th in Dallas. Today's program is being recorded, and please share the link with your networks so they understand why it's good for America and Americans to support Israel. We want to thank our webinar partner, Southwest Jewish Congress. Today's webinar features Reverend Dr. Tricia Miller. We'll be discussing Christian Zionists and how Zionism is good for both Christians and Jews. Reverend Dr. Miller is an evangelical Christian and minister. She's director of CAMRA's Partnership of Christians and Jews. CAMRA is the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. It is a nonprofit, pro-Israel, media monitoring and research organization founded in 1982. Reverend Miller's work at CAMRA provides a powerful response to anti-Christian and anti-Jewish voices in the global media, combats anti-Zionism in the church, tells the truth about Israel, and opposes all forms of anti-Semitism. She is the author of 2 books, one of which, Jews and Anti-Judaism in Esther and the Church, is about the relationship of Esther to current Christian anti-Judaism and anti-Zionism. Please use the Q&A Zoom feature to submit your questions during the webinar. We'll have time for questions. So, Tricia, let's start with discussing your work. What is Christian Zionism and how long has it been around?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's wonderful to be with you, and thank you for that gracious introduction. Let's define Zionism first, and then go to Christian Zionism. Zionism is simply the belief in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their own land. That's it. And so Christian Zionism is the belief that the promise of that specific land is part of the eternal and unconditional covenant that God made with Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob. So Christian Zionism is biblically based. We see throughout Scripture the promise of this specific land that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's repeated over and over. All the Hebrew prophets, except Jonah, because Jonah's a little different, but all the other Hebrew prophets talk about the return of the Jewish people to this land. Many, many verses talk about how God will bring his people back from the 4 corners of the earth. We live now, we get to see that. It's been happening for the last 100 to 200 years, especially. And so there's just no other option. If you are a Christian who believes the scriptures, there is no other option but to believe that the Jewish people have this right to be there and that it's a work of God, that God is doing this. When you think about how the Jewish people have survived through countless persecutions, the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust, and the Jewish people still are a recognizable entity with a common language and a common everyday, wherever they are, praying in the direction of Jerusalem and praying to return to Israel. That's miraculous. There's no other explanation for that.
So today, if you look at how Jews and how Israel is portrayed in the media, in social media, there is so much propaganda, so many lies that come out of Qatar and other places in social media. So what is it about that propaganda that is wrong? You're a theologian. What makes that propaganda wrong? And maybe we can talk about the replacement theology that exists. And you could talk about what it is.
All right. Well, the media is so biased and so inaccurate. If anybody is listening to any mainstream media, but now especially social media, anti-Semitism and just hatred of the Jews and the Jewish state is rampant, and it's all based on lies. I mean, we can talk about the error in the media coverage about Israel, because I can talk about,
yes,
specific
and
ways.
yes, both.
I can talk about specific ways that that's inaccurate, but first, if you to stay on the subject of Christian Zionism, let me talk about replacement theology.
Perfect.
Okay. That's the belief that the church and Christians have replaced Israel and the Jews in the purposes of God. So go back to what I said about Christian Zionist belief. Any Christian, whether they want to call themselves a Zionist or not, but any Christian who literally reads the Bible and believes the Bible, you cannot miss how Israel and the Jewish people are emphasized all the way from Genesis to the end of the Christian Testament, Revelation. It's there in every single book. But if you don't read it and understand that every time you see that word Israel or Jewish people, or how about Judea? Judea is called Judea because it's where the Jews are from. If you don't take that literally and you want to reinterpret it, and if you interpret the Bible allegorically, that words mean different things, that's how you come up with replacement theology. And unfortunately, from the time of the early church, there have been theologians who have taught that the Jews are cursed, they're rejected by God for whatever reason. They have multiple reasons, which I don't even want to give airtime
Mhm.
to.
Good.
Um, I don't want to go into that, but they say the Jews are replaced, they're rejected, they're cursed, and the church has taken the place of the Jewish people. That's replacement theology. It is wrong. It is theologically, biblically, and historically wrong.
Can you talk about, as a theologian, what the covenant was with God and Abraham?
Oh, I love that. Thank you. We often emphasize the fact that it's eternal, and it is. It's a Berit Olam. God made an eternal covenant with Abram. His name wasn't even changed yet, to Abraham. And part of that covenant, the features of that covenant were descendants and a land. That's if God told Abram that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars and that they were going to have this particular land. And it's not just any land. The boundaries of that land, the geographical boundaries of that land are given in Genesis. They're recognizable today. It talks about certain rivers, which we probably, it's larger than where Israel is now, and Israel is not trying to expand its borders. So I don't want to get into that, but
Mhm.
I'm just saying, biblically, God gave a specific land that's recognizable today by geographical markers. And that is emphasized over and over through the historical books of Torah, through the Psalms, through the prophets, and it is in the New Testament as well, and all the way to Revelation. So it's eternal. And one of the challenges I have for Christians is if they want to believe that God has broken this covenant with Abraham because for whatever reason that people have come up with, that the Jews should now be rejected, then what good is the covenant they think they have? Christians believe that they have a covenant through the blood of Jesus, that we have salvation through Jesus. Well, if God can decide to break his covenant with Abraham because the Jews messed up somewhere along the line, what security do Christians have? None. The point is, God doesn't break covenant. But the other really significant part of that covenant that he made with Abraham, it's not only eternal, and those words, Berit Olam, it's eternal covenant, that's emphasized and repeated over and over. But the other thing about the covenant is it's unconditional. And a lot of people don't read the details very thoroughly. When Abram was like, okay, God, how am I going to believe this is going to happen? Because I'm this old and I haven't had a child yet. And you keep telling me I'm going to have descendants. So God gives him instructions on how to set up a sacrifice. And it's the way covenants were made in the ancient Near East. They cut up animals in half, lay them in two rows, and the people who are making the covenant walk through that row of slain animals together. Well, what happened in Genesis? Abram sets it all up and then he falls asleep. Okay, and then the symbols of God, the flaming torch and the smoking pot, that goes through, walks through the pieces of cut up animals. So it's only God that is the party to that covenant. Abram was asleep. He didn't walk through the carcasses of animals. And so he was not a party to the covenant. That means it's only God responsible for keeping the covenant. So it doesn't matter what Abraham's descendants do or don't do, God keeps the covenant.
So when you tell this to Christians, what is their response?
A lot of eye-opening,
Uh,
it's very eye-opening. The other thing that causes eyes to open is when I say, do you realize Jesus was Jewish? That we're talking about the physical blood relatives of Jesus.
mhm.
Mary was Jewish. I mean, Jesus had a Jewish mother. And so the Jews are the physical relatives of Jesus. That
And he was
also,
and he was praying at the second temple in Jerusalem, not the first, but the second. So that was for Jews. So
yeah.
maybe that was something else to point out. I want to ask you how you respond to what comes out of the church today that is clearly anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. Just recently, out of England, out of the Church of England, I don't know if you've heard, the
Yep.
Archbishop of Canterbury, Dame Sarah Mullally, she had a
Mhm.
document called, and the name of it should be a dead giveaway about its objective, but it's called A Moment of Truth, Faith in a Time of Genocide, where she, as the Archbishop of Canterbury, states there was a quote indigenous Christian Palestinian presence in the Holy Land at the time of Jesus. How do you respond to that?
It's it's lies. It's okay. It's you asked me earlier about replacement theology. The
Yeah.
Palestinian Christians have their own version of replacement theology. They teach that the Palestinian people, which is also made up.
Talk
uh,
about that so people will learn about that,
Oh,
the Palestine as a name.
oh, okay. That the land was designated as Palestine by the Romans in the second century after one more Jewish revolt because the Jews were trying to throw these occupiers. Talk about oppressors and occupiers. It was the Romans occupying the Jewish land and, oppressing them horribly. And the Jews revolted in the second century and they were defeated, of course, because the Roman army was much more powerful.
Mm.
But in the effort to completely wipe out any memory, hopefully, of the Jews, what the Romans did was rename the land. The land had been called Judea. It's called Judea because Jews live there. It's the Jewish land. They changed the name to Palestine because they were trying to bring up the memory of the Philistines, who had been the ancient enemies of the Jews. It was just one more way they were trying to pour salt in the wounds of the Jews to rename the land Palestine. So now that has been so misinterpreted historically that people now think that that was a country. It was never a country. Palestine was it was a geographical designation, but there was never a country called Palestine. There's never been a government of Palestine. There's no Palestinian language. And until the 1960s, the people who identified as Palestinians were the Jews. The Jews who were living in, quote, Palestine before the establishment of Israel,
The British mandate for
they were,
Palestine in the
yeah,
20s.
they were the Palestinians. The
Right.
newspaper, today's newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, it used to be called the Palestinian Post, the
Hmm.
Palestine Post. So it's only in the 60s with Yasser Arafat and the PLO, and they decided to take on the name, oh, we're the Palestinians, because they could create this historical narrative
Right.
that they're the indigenous people of the land, and they're not. So now the Palestinian Christians identify as Palestinians. They're not, they're Arabs. They're Arabs just like all the Arabs around them. They just take that name so that they can try to delegitimize Jews being there.
It was great propaganda, and it's working, obviously.
Yeah.
So to what you mentioned about so much propaganda, Israel's committing genocide, which if we're committing genocide, why is the population of Gaza increasing? But I
Yes.
digress. What sort of sources of accurate reporting do you recommend? And I want you to mention Camera's newsletter and Camera's efforts, but where could Christians go if they're looking for reporting? Where can everybody go for accurate media?
Well, I will mention Camera first because the Camera website, www.camera.org, is an
Thank you.
excellent source of research. Every day, new articles are added. When you go to the homepage, the most recent articles are on the top and addressing everything that happens in relation to Israel. Within that, we have the Partnership of Christians and Jews. I send out a newsletter for Christians specifically, although that's how it started. But I have more and more Jews on my mailing list as well because they've gotten interested in because I also do a lot with Jewish Christian relations. So if you want my newsletter, it's only about once a month. It's not, I don't bomb your inboxes.
How would people sign up?
Email me at
Okay.
tricia@camera.org.
TRICIA.
At camera.org.
Okay.
And tell me you want to sign up and I'll put you on that. Then as
Okay.
far as Christian news about Israel that is 100% reliable,
Yeah.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, they are accurate. They have a bureau in Jerusalem. I've been there. I've been interviewed by them. But Gordon Robertson is the head of it. They're headquartered in Virginia Beach. They are completely reliable. In the Jewish world, JNS
Mhm.
um, is also a very good source for accurate reporting. There's Palestinian Media Watch. And
Okay.
Camera has an Arabic department,
Oh.
um, which translates everything out of Arabic too, and counters the error.
Mhm.
Palestinian Media Watch watches everything, video,
Mhm.
everything printed that's written in Arabic, and you have to know what these guys are saying in Arabic because they say completely different things in Arabic than they say in
Sure.
English. So
Yeah, and
that's an
that's for
accurate
the
source.
street.
Yeah.
So, as a theologian, let's talk about how some of this propaganda comes about. The word Zion, a Zionist is now a bad
Yeah.
word. But let's talk about, where did Zion, the word, come from?
It comes from the mountain in Jerusalem, Mount Zion.
It's a Hebrew word.
Yes. So if you are sympathetic or supportive of Israel and the Jewish people returning to their ancient homeland, you talk about Zion. It's it's the mountain right there. One of the gates to the old city is the Zion Gate because it's one of the mountains that Jerusalem is built on is Mount Zion.
It's hard to say that the Jews weren't there when they named the mountain that was there. So, to get back to your point that God made an irrevocable covenant, cannot be broken, and we're talking, Jesus roamed the earth in the first, let's say, zero, when it was
Mhm.
before 70 AD, when the second temple was destroyed. And we don't have Islam till the seventh century. So
Right.
there's a whole big gap there where there were no Muslims practicing their faith. Yet how in today's world you get this message from the Islamic community that they have now replaced Christians and Jews, of course.
Mhm.
What does that make Islam as a faith?
Well, it makes them the supersessionist believers now, because they that is what they teach, that the Jewish faith and the Christian faith are corrupt. Muhammad came along and fixed it, straightened it all out. But they they do not believe in the same God at all. Christians and Jews believe in the same God, one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you read the Bible, you see characteristics of God and the way his character, his nature, the way he relates to us with love and mercy, and you can go on and on. And there is not that at all in the Muslim God. So it's not even the same God, and their God teaches them to kill, to forcefully convert people and or kill them. That's not what the faith of the Bible teaches us.
And to your point, Muhammad was a brilliant warrior. He turned
Hmm.
a couple of thousand people into tens of thousands of people to kill other people and dominate them and whatever. So I want to ask you, you are so educated about the Old Testament and the New Testament and an understanding of where the truth is to combat some of these horrible lies. What is the state of training of Christian theologians today to understand that Jews are the indigenous people in the Middle East? Israel is the homecoming for the Jews. It's in the
Hmm.
Bible, it's God's covenant. What is the state of the education of future theologians today?
That's a question of concern to
Oh
me.
dear.
Because as I said, any Christian who reads their Bible and believes it can see Israel there. And God's, even before it was called Israel, the covenant with Abraham, starting there, but the covenant with the Jewish people, you can see that from beginning to end. But it isn't a question of concern to me that it's not being taught in, enough in Christian colleges and seminaries. I am seeing a lack of understanding of this. And then when you don't understand that scripturally as a Christian, then that leaves the door open for the deception, for the lies of, like we were talking about, the Palestinian Christians who have rewritten history, with their narrative that they are the indigenous people of the land. And let me mention that because they say that they are the indigenous people of the land, and the Jews, they say the Jews were not there until a couple hundred years ago. So then the theological conclusion from that is, guess what? Jesus wasn't Jewish. If there were no Jews in the land when Jesus was born, which is what they claim, Jesus couldn't be Jewish. Jesus is Palestinian. Well, the Nazis did that. We've heard this. We've seen this show before. The Nazis turned Jesus into an Aryan. That's how dangerous it is. But in the case of making Jesus a Palestinian and denying that, they're rewriting the whole Bible too. I've already said they've rewritten history to create their narrative, but they're rewriting the whole Bible. And what's alarming to me is that Christians can be swayed by the emotionally laden narrative from the Palestinian Christians that they're suffering and they're oppressed, that, Israel's built these horrible walls and whatever. And it doesn't even bother them that they're rewriting the Bible.
So
That shouldn't they be concerned that everything about Jesus is very blatantly Jewish if you read the Bible? But if you don't, you don't understand that.
is it all aspects of Christianity that has this misguided, incorrect, lie-based
Mm-mm.
view of where is it in the church?
Uh, the bottom line is that the further away you get from the Bible, the more into this deception you get. And
Uh-huh.
so evangelical Christians are the ones who most faithfully read the Bible and believe the Bible. Evangelical Christians are very strong in their support for Israel, the vast
Okay.
majority. I mean, yes, there's a constant battle there too, because they're being challenged by this other narrative that's false. And so people, we all have to keep speaking the truth. But evangelical Christians around the world are very solid in their support of Israel. The main distinguishing reason is because they actually read the Bible and believe it. So it's the older churches, the Orthodox, the Catholic, the established churches, um, oftentimes in the very, high liturgical churches, people don't even read the Bible for themselves. They just go to mass or whatever, and they just all they know is what the priest says. Then the next layer of that is the mainline denominational churches, the traditional churches, Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Anglican. They have they have really bought into this. Unfortunately, the vast majority.
And so, how do you reach out? How does Camera and in your work reach out to those communities to correct their misunderstanding?
We have written quite a bit. The Partnership of Christians and Jews has written quite a bit, especially about mainline denominational churches and some about the Catholics. And we also just put an article up. You mentioned what just happened with the Anglican Church. We just posted an article yesterday on the camera website. So go and I encourage everyone to go and look at that, read the article that exposes what is so horrible about what the Anglican Church just did, the Church of England. But my primary focus is the evangelical world because that's really where the battle is for truth. The other, other denominations are pretty far gone as far as believing the lies about Israel and the false theology and the false history and all of that. But the evangelical world is really where, the work is just to continue to educate, continue giving them the correct information so that they know the facts.
What would you recommend for a listener or a viewer when they hear the propaganda, the lies about Israel and about Jews? What could the average person do?
You need to check multiple news sources for one thing. You can't just believe any one thing you see. And you need to go to sources like Camera or CBN, like I just mentioned, JNS. But the other thing you can do is look for pictures. Pictures are often used very, very deceptively. Do a little research on your own. Find out where that picture really came from. Sometimes they're AI. Sometimes they've used pictures from some other war to show, some child that's been killed and they claim it was in Gaza and it wasn't. So look at pictures, look at how the headline is worded. You can tell how that you can detect bias if you analyze how the headline's worded. And then as you read an article, look at how the information is presented and look for gaps, look for omissions. If it's completely one-sided and there's not any context given, you can be pretty sure it's propaganda, that it's bias.
So they can be aware of the propaganda. Hopefully they know how to spot an AI document. But if they want to be proactive and prevent further propaganda, what would they do?
Well, then they need to equip themselves with the facts because you have to know the truth to be able to speak out. Camera does a lot of letter writing. There's just members of Camera where they will write letters to the editor, letters to reporters, whatever, when they've seen something. It can be in your
Does your
local.
newsletter do that? Would your newsletter notify people this is something? Click on this, send this back.
No, that's something that comes from Camera
Camera.
at
Very good.
large. So if you go to the Camera website, www.camera.org, you can sign up to be on the mailing list. And then you also get alerts about things that are in the media that, just that people can be interested in writing about. So people can write, people can publish their own articles if they feel comfortable doing that, but they can at least write to editors and point out errors and challenge media sources to correct what they've written.
Do you find that the Christian community is growing more aware of the propaganda and more resistant to the propaganda?
Yes and no, just depends
Oh, dear.
on when. It's a mix. Yeah, it's a mixture. It's actually becoming more polarized, with people who are more aware and less aware. And when we see it's reflected in the general culture with the far right extremes that we're seeing, that's reflected a little bit as well in the church about Israel. But the vast majority of the evangelical world is solidly pro-Israel.
Good. And I'll ask my last question. Do you find that there are many more people that are simply unaware, open to
Mhm.
education than just closed-minded?
Yes,
That's encouraging.
that's the vast majority. The vast majority is uninformed, and that's who we have to reach with the facts.
Good.
We have the extremes on both sides, but the vast majority is very uninformed and just needs facts.
Wonderful. Well, that's certainly encouraging. Oh, Tricia, I want to thank you so much for your time and the incredible work you do. And I want to encourage everyone to sign up for Camera's newsletter and Tricia at camera.org, your own
Mhm.
newsletter. And I want to remind listeners that if you want to go for accurate reporting, we'll post the links to what Tricia recommended after we get the recording done. I want to thank everybody for attending. We'll be hosting Israel Now Forum webinars in 2026 on Tuesdays at noon Central. Our next webinar is Tuesday, August 11th at noon with Karen Baral, Chief Policy Officer of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. And she'll present Fighting Anti-Semitism Through Law and Policy at the Brandeis Center. Check our website for announcements and your inbox. Our website is israelnowforum.org. Bye for now.